Right, let's go live on Facebook. Just so everyone's aware as well, this you'll see it pop up on the screen anyway. This is being streamed live to Facebook and being recorded as well. Well, it'll be uploaded to Facebook and YouTube for public viewing. So if you don't like your face or name or anything being shown, then either change your name or turn your camera off or whatever. Thank you. It's the politest way I can say it. I can hear myself because I've opened the stream up.
Thinking ahead, if I'm honest, none of this crossed my mind yesterday.
You might need to mute everyone, George.
I've just done a few mutes. Yeah, if everyone can just mute themselves, just so there's no background noise, that'd be great. If not, I will mute you anyway, because I'm nice like that. So it's 18 people.
It's also a problem with it's not opening up, isn't it, until dead on the dot of.
Well, no, we've got quite a few people here before, so it's not a huge problem, I don't think. But it just means we have to wait for a couple of minutes after the hour, but that's okay. Welcome, everyone who's just coming in. And anyone who's watching on Facebook Live, I can't see you at the moment, but I will see you in a minute. Oh. Just give it a couple more minutes here and then we'll get started. Welcome to those just joining us. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes here. I know I've said that for about 10 minutes now, but there we are. Just want to make sure we can get everyone in and no one misses the start. Still got quite a few people coming in. That's good. Right. Okay. Just give it one more minute. I mean that this time. Thanks everyone for your patience. Welcome. Right, I think we shall begin. Once I've done that, cool. Stop sharing. Right, welcome everyone to this Greenhavens Network talk as part of the Wild Gardens project that we're running. It's great to have you all here. We're very lucky today to be joined by Dr. Nikki Gammons, who is the project manager for the Short-haired Bumblebee Reintroduction Program for the Bumble Bee Conservation Trust. And we'll be having the pleasure of having a talk from her in about any minute now, really. So just a few quick things to go through. Obviously, as you would have seen, this meeting is currently being live streamed and recorded. I've said that till I'm blue in the face, I think, at this point, but it is. So just so you're aware of that. And if you can keep yourselves on mute during the meeting or during the talk, then that would be amazing as well. At the end of the talk, we'll be having a Q&A session with questions from both the Zoom and the Facebook Live. And if you have any questions during the talk, then please do feel free to pop them in the chat box. You can find there's a little button at the bottom of the screen that says chat. If you want to pop them in there, that'd be fantastic. And we'll put those to Nikki at the end. Thank you very much. Was there anything else I was meant to say? Yes, that's what I was meant to say. This, as you may be aware, this whole project has been gratefully funded with a grant from the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport in partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund. It's a mouthful. And one of the things that we need to do to satisfy the grant is just to very quickly ask you all how you heard about this meeting, this talk today. So if you wouldn't mind for just a second, I'm going to pop a thing up on your screen. If you could just take 3 seconds, I think it takes, just to click on a button. Oh, look at that. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Much appreciated. And then without any further ado, I am going to hand over to Nikki, if that's okay. Nikki.
Yes, thank you, George. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to hear all about our bumblebees. So I shall share my screen with everybody. There we go. Can that be seen by everyone, George?
Yep, all good.
Excellent. Let's make that bigger. Okay, so I'm going to talk to everybody for around about 50 minutes or so. And sort of, first of all, I want to give an introduction basically to our 3 different types of bees, a little bit about their ecology, their similarities and the differences between them. Also go through their decline, why they're so important, and of course, how we can help them and conserve them as well. And one of the main reasons that we can all help our bees and how it's reasonably easy to do is actually through gardening. So whether this is your own garden or through any community space, there are lots of options that you can do. After that, I'll give you a very brief introduction to Bumblebee ID. So many of you might have seen the really big bumblebees out and about at the moment, about an inch or so big. Those are our queens. And they're coming out and they are emerging from hibernation and they are looking for somewhere suitable to found their nest. It's our most common bees that are emerging at the moment. So I'll give you a brief introduction to who you might be seeing in your gardens. I'll then give you an update on the project that I work on, which is called the Short-haired Bumblebee Project. And this is the attempted reintroduction of one of our extinct UK bumblebee species. This project's been going for 12 years, and I'll just discuss what we've done to date and what we plan to do in the future. So an introduction first off to our 3 types of bee. So what do all of our bees have in common? Well, they're actually all veggies. They're vegetarians and they get all of the food that they need from flowers. So they collect pollen, which is full of protein, which obviously is a very good food resource. And they collect nectar from flowers, which is full of sugars, carbohydrates. So that's very good for powering their flight. And they will also feed that to their offspring as well. So it is the females that carry and collect that pollen and then feed their offspring. Now in the UK, out of all of the bees that we actually have, around 274, the vast majority of these, 250, are actually solitary bees. So they don't form a colony. You don't have the queen and the worker caste. These are just males and females. First of all, the males will emerge out. They will wait around the areas where the females come out. They will then mate, and the female will look for somewhere suitable to go and lay her egg. So this can be in the south-facing side of our buildings, particularly in our mortar. It can be in our front lawns or our back lawns, particularly where there's a lot of bare ground. It can also be anywhere where there's soft, sandy, or easily soil for those females to dig through. So once she finds that, she will lay one egg, and then she will go and forage for that one individual egg. And that may take her between 70 to 100 trips just to get enough pollen and nectar to feed that one egg. Once she's fed and stored that nectar and pollen for the egg, she seals off the end of the cell where she's laid the egg, and she will then lay another egg and again provision that one with nectar and pollen. And that is the level of maternal care within our solitary bees. All that female does is provide the nectar and pollen, seals up the end of the cell, and then keeps laying eggs. So the flight period of many of our female solitary bees is quite short. The males will only generally live for a couple of weeks, and their role is really to mate and die. So the females will live from anything to between 8 weeks to about 12 weeks. Okay, and at the end they will die, and their offspring will then emerge the following year. Now, many of our solitary bees are in fact quite specific on what they actually go and look for in their forage. So they may only visit 1 or 2 different flowering plants. Some of our most common solitary bees may visit between 8 to 10, but they tend to be a lot more specialized when we compare them to the honeybees and then to the bumblebees. So at the bottom there, I've got some examples of solitary bees. So we roughly group them, if you like, into leaf cutter bees. And you'll know if you have a leaf cutter bee in your garden because they cut a perfect semicircle out of your rose bush. We also have mason bees, like the one in the middle there, and those mason bees will use mud to divide up between their cells, whereas the leaf cutter will use the leaves. We also then have our mining bees, and they tend to burrow and nest underground. So next type of bees that we actually have are called our honeybees. Now, there is only one species of honeybee across Europe, but there's about 8 to 12 worldwide. Now, the difference between our honeybees, our solitary bees, and our bumblebees is also not just in their biology, but also in how they're classed as well. And in fact, honeybees are not classed as a native species to the UK. And that is because they've been introduced to many different parts of the world, not just for the pollination services, but also the products that you can get from the hive as well. So of course, there's the honey, the beeswax, and the royal jelly. Another important difference between our honeybee, our bumblebee, and our solitary bee is that honeybees have a very complex society. So you have one queen, and then you have the worker force. Now, all of those workers are actually female as well. The difference between a queen and a worker is that a queen has fully developed ovaries, so she is able to mate. Whereas workers do not have fully developed ovaries and they are not able to mate. So it is the role of the workers to go out and find forage, and they will tend the eggs and tend the queen as well. The males, which are called drones in honeybees, but that's only in honeybees where they're called drones, are produced at a certain time of the year, and their role is to mate with queens from other hives. So the queen herself will never go out and forage for the colony. That is the role of her workers. The only time she leaves her hive is twice in her life cycle. The first time that she leaves is actually her nuptial flight. So she will disperse away from her maternal hive. She will emit a pheromone which attracts the drones to her, the males. She will multiply mate with those, and then she will return back into her hive, and that is then where she will remain. The only other time she will actually leave is when she is usurped by a new queen within that hive. So a usurped queen will leave her original hive, and she will take with her between 2,000 to 5,000 workers. And that's what we call a swarm. And swarms only occur in honeybees. Bumblebees don't do that. Solitary bees obviously don't do that either. So a swarm is the old queen being pushed out, and they will then look for somewhere suitable to go and found a nest. Now, a queen honeybee can live up to a maximum of about 5 years, but if she does live for that length of time, she's normally usurped after about a year or two. But they're much more like a perennial society, and that's because a queen is always produced and replaced, and there is always workers contained. Last type of bee is our big, fluffy, furry ones. So the big, fluffy, furry ones are our bumblebees. So like our honeybees, they do have a queen and they have a worker caste, but the setup and establishment and the life cycle is very, very different. So at the moment, you might see our really big bumbles coming out, queens looking for somewhere suitable to found her nest. She will found her nest and she will then collect pollen and nectar for it. She will then feed her eggs, and as soon as those eggs turn into workers, they then go out and forage for that nest. So workers are just mini versions of the queen, but like in with our honeybees, they are unmated. So that's the difference between a worker and a queen. Now, a bumblebee life cycle is much shorter compared to what a honeybee's is, because a queen will only live for a maximum of 1 year. Now, if she does live for that 1 year, the majority of her lifespan is actually spent in hibernation. So a colony cycle on average is around about 3.5 months, with just one colony actually going through to about 5 months. At the end of that colony cycle, the original queen, all of the workers and the males, which again are produced at the end of the cycle, will die, and only that new generation of queens will survive. So at the bottom here, I've got some pictures of some of our bumblebees. So you can see quite a few of them do have that characteristic white tail with the yellow and black stripes, but we do have a variety of different colour patterns. And it is that variety of colour patterns that we use to distinguish our bees apart from each other. What else then are the similarities and the differences between honeybees, bumblebees, and our solitary bees? So honeybees are a domesticated species, as I said earlier. So they're not classed as native to the UK. They have been introduced to large parts of Europe, the rest of the world as well. Whereas our bumblebees and our solitary bees are classed as native. So as I said earlier, one species of honeybee in Europe. Now, of our bumblebees, we did have recorded 27, but we now only have 24. So we've had some extinctions. But 18 of those 24 species are what we call truly social. So you have the queen and you have the worker caste. The remaining 6 of those bumblebees are actually called cuckoo bumblebees. And they're so called because they act quite similar to the cuckoo bird. The female of a cuckoo bumblebee will go inside the nest of a social colony, dislodge the queen, may make her subdominant, may even kill her. That female cuckoo will then lay her eggs inside of that nest and let the workers of the host look after them. It's a bit of a cheater of the system. Within a honeybee hive, you may have 50 to 100,000 workers, so a very large colony size. If we compare that to our bumbles, it's on average about 150, and just one species would get up to 400-500. So it's a much smaller colony size, about the size of a small football. Of course, with our solitary bees, they don't produce any workers, they just have males and females. Now, honeybees have actually evolved to be able to communicate with each other where to go out and find forage. And this is called the Wacko Dance. So basically, when a worker comes back into the hive with their crop full of nectar, their pollen baskets full, they will do a dance. and they will move their abdomen at specific angles according to the sun. And in that dance, they can also communicate how far to actually travel. So they can actively recruit fellow workers to a good food resource. In the case of bumbles, they don't do any dancing and they can't communicate, if you like, in that same way. So how they communicate with each other is basically when they come back with food, with pollen and nectar, it just merely is a demonstration to the other workers within that colony that there's food out there, but they can't communicate where to go and find it. So why do honeybees store that large amount of honey? Well, a large percentage of that colony will actually survive over the winter months, maybe 50, 60%. Of course, the temperatures are cold. There's not much food available. So storing that honey means that that will get them through those winter months. And as soon as it becomes spring, they will go out and forage again. Now, in the case of our bumblebees, they do obviously collect and store nectar. We don't call it honey with our bumblebees, but they only store enough for the next 3 to 5 days. They don't store it en masse. So when a new queen goes into hibernation, she relies entirely on her fat reserves. She doesn't take any food stores with her. The original colony she came from has died as well. So also in our honeybees, they are in decline, as in all of our bees are in decline for slightly different reasons. Honeybees mainly due to diseases, varroamide, American, European foul brood disease. The main impact on our bumblebees and solitary bees has actually been loss of suitable foraging habitat. And that has also been a big effect on the honeybees as well. But that's one of the main reasons why we have seen many of our bee species and other insect pollinators decline. Another important difference between our 3 types of bee is also the length of their tongues. So as a general rule, our solitary bees have a short tongue length, honeybees are in the middle with a medium tongue length, and all bumblebees have a long tongue length in comparison. But we also divide our bumbles into short tongues and into long tongues. So it's this variety of tongue lengths that our bees have that means that they can pollinate a wide diversity of different flowers. So there is no one type of bee that can do that complete array of pollination. So that's why we need to conserve all of our 3 different types. Oh. Ooh.
Hey, Nikki.
Ooh. Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, there we go.
Loud and clear, Nikki.
Oh, okay. So here we've got a little video here, and this is actually showing the slowed down motion of a bumblebee queen. So this is a buff-tail. This is one of our most common species that we have here. And this one is collecting nectar. You see she's sticking out a tongue from white dead nettle. She's also got a pollen basket full, and that's got white pollen from that flower. Now this video has been slowed down massively, as you can see, and that is because bumblebees can beat their wing beats 200 beats per second. Now, because they can beat their wing beats 200 beats per second, it means that they have to have a constant supply of nectar. So bumblebees must feed every 40 minutes. And that's why they need a continuation of forage throughout the whole of their life cycle, 3.5 months, and also throughout that day as well. So let's recap. So we have around about 278 or so native bee species in the UK. One species of honeybee, which I've said isn't classed as native. We then have 27 different types of bumblebee and about 250 solitary bee species. So in the UK, 1 in 3 of our bee species is classed as rare or threatened. In the case of our bumblebees, we have had 2 species that have gone extinct. And one was temporarily only recorded actually in the east of Kent, basically just over 1 year. So we class that as a failed colonization as opposed to an establishment and an extinction. But the other two were established and have gone extinct over the last 80 or so years. Of our bumblebees, we also have a further 6 which are classed as BAP species. And this means that they are Biodiversity Action Plan. So this basically means that their ranges have declined by a minimum of 60%, sometimes even over 90% of the area we used to find them in. So they're now of high conservation importance. So why are our bees so valuable to us? Well, of course, they pollinate some of our highest value crops. In fact, around about 84%. And they pollinate about 80% of our wildflowers as well. So, of course, they're important not only for pollination services, our crop yields, our good health of a crop, they're also very important for that ecosystem as well, and maintaining the variety we have in our ecosystem. So what value do our bees have? Well, this is guesstimated at anything from 560 to 800 million pounds per year. So of course, that's a large amount and a free service that the bees are providing. Now, bumblebees do something special as well in addition, and this is with a certain technique of pollination that they use, which is called buzz pollination or sonication. Now, on certain crops, such as tomatoes, the pollen is held very tightly on the anthers. So when another bee species or another insect pollinator lands on that flower, they can't get the pollen off. So what a bumblebee would do is land on that flower. They then unhook their wing muscles. They then vibrate their whole body. It causes the anthers to vibrate, and then it causes the pollen to drop off. So the bumblebee can then collect it. So crops such as tomatoes, aubergines, blueberries, all need pollination in this way. And in the UK and in large parts of Northwest Europe, it is only bumblebees that are able to do that. As we go further into the southern Europe, it is mainly carpenter bees that are also able to do that alongside the bumblebees as well. So I've got another little video clip here for you. Now, this video clip here, this is actually a North American bumblebee species. But what this female is doing is she's landed on her flower. She has unhooked her wing muscles. Her body is now vibrating. She's then causing that pollen to come off and dislodge. And as that pollen is coming off, she's able to collect it. So as she gets the right frequency of vibration as well, you can see more and more of that pollen comes off. It covers the bee's body. And once she's finished collecting that pollen, she will basically comb it into her pollen baskets, recouple her wing muscles, and then she's able to go on and fly to the next flower or revisit and drop that pollen off back to her nest. So what is one of the major regions? So I sort of hinted at this quite largely before. One of the main reasons why they are disappearing is actually due to loss of our flower-rich meadows. And really over about the last 60 to 80 years, we've lost over 97% of our ancient wildflower meadows. So of course, this has had a dramatic impact on our bumblebees, other bee species, because this is where they forage and this is where they also nest as well. So what happened really 80 or so years ago? Well, it was actually during and after the end of the Second World War. We had the Dig for Victory campaign. We then had the baby boom thereafter. So we really needed to increase the amount of food that we were producing. So farming did have to intensify. But the government encouraged farmers and gave grants to farmers to increase the use of pesticides and fertilizers. Now, this wasn't done quite so sustainably for our bees. So an increase, for example, of the fertility of the soil. So if you add fertilizer to a soil, you encourage grass growth. And those grasses will dominate and outcompete all of the wildflowers. Wildflowers naturally like the fertility of the soil, and typically that can be quite poor fertility. Of course, in the use of pesticides as well, of course, pesticides are there and they're actually used obviously for the pest to protect that crop species. but also it can actually affect many of our pollinators as well. So something like neonicotinoids, which are basically pesticides that have been used since around about the 1990s, they're mainly used as a seed coating. So as they cover the seed, they cover them before they're sown. So when they're sown into the ground, as that flower grows, the pesticide is basically throughout that plant. So it is found all around it. So that means that it can protect it against herbivory from pests. However, though, because it's been used in seed coating and grows up with that flower, it's also found in the pollen and nectar. So that means, of course, beneficial insects that are visiting that flower to pollinate it are also ingesting these pesticides, the neonicotinoids. So many of you might have heard a lot about neonicotinoids. They're quite topical at the moment. But if anybody would like to ask me any more questions about neonicotinoids and their use, I can certainly answer those later. So, of course, with this increased increased use of intensification, a lot of farmland was put into heavy production, which meant the loss of common fields, hedgerows were pulled out, and a lot of agriculture was sown with a lot of machinery, much more efficiently at larger, bigger scale. So a lot of land was put into production, and this caused fragmentation as well of the habitat. And of course, also with increasing population, this also caused a fragmentation as well of our habitat, so increasing urbanization. So these things combined really had quite a serious effect on many of our insect pollinators, and of course everything else that relies on these areas. Oh, I do apologize. That's it. There we go. So what can we do to help? Well, one of the best things that we can do, of course, is in our own gardens or in any outdoor community space. Allotments are also an absolutely fantastic place where we can really encourage bees and provide a safe haven for them, and where we can increase and create long-term flowering throughout that years to years as well. So traditionally in the UK, we used to have English cottage gardens. So these English cottage gardens used to have a lot of flowers that were derived from our wildflowers that still produced a large amount of pollen and nectar. However, over the last few decades, a fashion has really been more towards highly cultivated flowers. So many of these are grown, if you like, for their beauty, but they may hold no value or little value to our insect pollinators. And a prime example of that actually is our roses. So the rose on the bottom is the dog rose. That's an ancient ancestor to our rose. And you can see the pollen and nectar is readily available there. It's a single petaled. But on a highly cultivated rose, those sepals turn into petals, and there is no longer any pollen produced and very little nectar. But of course, there is a huge amount of things that we can put in our garden which are going to be suitable for our bees. And at our Bumblebee Conservation Trust, we actually have a really good app, which is called Be Kind. And on this, you can click all the flowers that you have in your garden, if it's an allotment or if it's a community project as well. You can click on all the flowers and it gives you a rating and a score. So it might give you ideas about what else to plant if there's a particular month where you don't have a lot of forage, or if you are wanting to develop a garden, you could click on and see which flowers you might like to have in there. So that's a really nice resource to have a look at. This is a very short summary of some of the things that you can plant, and I'm going to be going a bit more in depth into gardening because it is such an important thing that we can do to help our bees. So I spoke earlier about that there's a difference in tongue length between short tongues and then between long tongues. There's also a difference in the time that our bees emerge. So our earlier emergers will emerge anytime from January through to around about April time. And those tend to have 2 cycles during the year. The one at the top corner there, the buff-tailed bumblebee, that actually has 3 cycles during the year. And that started around about the 1990s. And that's probably because we're having much milder winters, but also providing much more forage in our gardens as well for them. Our other species, the late emergers, they tend to have long tongues. and they will emerge anything from May through to June. And they only have one colony cycle per year. And those late emergers are the ones that rely on open, flower-rich meadows. So it is from that group of the late emergers, slightly longer tongue bees, that are the ones that are declining. But what's most important in our gardens is having that consistency of forage throughout the seasons, and even month by month, just making sure something's in flower, or ideally a few things are in flower. So as I was saying, winter, you may not think of a time for our bumblebees, but as I said, due to mild winters and some things being planted now in our gardens, our community areas, it's providing forage. So some of those queens that should go into hibernation in autumn are actually having a third life cycle. So these are some of the examples that we can put in our gardens or community areas during winter. Then as we come on to spring, of course, more and more things we can plant. So just out flowering now is the pulmonaria, the lungwort. Brilliant flower, attracts quite a few different solitary bee species as well. Another excellent forage, if you do have space for trees, is actually the willow. The pussy willow and the grey willow are fantastic early forage for our bees. Other things as well, like flowering currant. Other very good things as well, particularly if, you know, in the southeast, we often have quite droughttish summers where it gets very dry. Herbs are fantastic for that because obviously they're very drought tolerant. And so many of our flowering herbs, such as rosemary, are ideal for our bees. But one of the single best forage has got to be the dandelion. Hated by so many people for not really a reason. I think it's more because of the adverts for Roundup that sort of show an evil dandelion, but they are one of the single most important forage for our bees, particularly solitary bees. Many species rely solely on dandelions. So if you do leave just a couple in your garden, that's great. You can always, of course, mow them out or pull them out if they've spread too much. But they are one of the single best flowers, and they are a beautiful flower as well. Later in spring, obviously crocuses are out now. Cotoneaster, tiny flower, but very, very popular with all of the 3 types of bee. Anything as well, of course, our fruits, our vegetables. Why allotments are so good is because you've got a continuous supply there of forage, which is great for our pollinators. Native primroses are also another very, very good flower as well. Some things that might creep into your garden that are viewed as weeds, as well as obviously the dandelions, maybe things like the red dead nettle, the ground ivy, the white dead nettle. Again, these are some of the most single important forage that we can have at this time of year going into April and May. April and May is where there's a particularly low amount of food that's available for bumblebees as they emerge, particularly our rare species. So having little pockets of these flowers in our gardens is a real haven for our bees. Summer, of course, we can go on. Many of these flowers, of course, you can find in garden centres, but more and more there's lots of online nurseries that will provide plug plants or 9-centimetre plants that you can also put in as well. One of the best things has got to be lavender, the old English lavender in particular. Butterflies, moths, hoverflies, bees will all use it, a great one to have. Sunflowers are also an excellent food resource, but also in your gardens, allotments, or in your community spaces, strawberries are fantastic as well. And any single petaled rose is good for them as well. Late summer is again when we have a little bit of lack of forage, particularly end of August going through into really October. And again, black horehound, the woundwort and white dead nettles are again fantastic forage which can be available at these times as well. So some of those weeds that come up in your garden, are they really weeds? They're fantastic forage for our pollinators. And sometimes people say to me, I can't get anything to grow in this shady area. Well, sometimes letting something come up from the seed bank is the perfect thing for that area. But there is always something that you can find, whether you buy that from a nursery or allow your seed bank to come up, there's always going to be something perfect for no matter what spot you have. Wildflowers, of course, are an excellent addition to any garden. They're beautiful, they're colourful, they tend to be very hardy, and of course, many of them will produce a good amount of nectar and pollen. An excellent flower is Viper's bugloss. It literally drips nectar. Likes quite a nice sunny area. Other things that make up your garden are things like clovers, and clovers are one of the single best, very good pollen supplies because their protein is full of nitrogen, which is very, very good for building proteins. So excellent. Lots of our annuals as well, such as cornflowers, corn marigolds, are also very good. And yellow rattle is an excellent addition if you're wanting to create a wildflower patch. And a bit more on that in the next couple of slides. What's one of the best things that you can do for wildlife in your garden is to create a pond. So obviously you can attract a wide diversity of different species of this, but also the planting around that pond can be ideal for our bees as well. So within the pond, things like yellow flag iris, later on you've got purple loosestrife there, and then you've got water mint. So that's early, mid and late forage, which is perfect for our bumblebees as well. So ponds are a great addition to any outdoor space. Now, many people, more and more as well, are tending to perhaps trying to create a little wildflower patch. Now, this doesn't matter how big it is, you manage it in exactly the same way. Now, this is one of the wildflower meadows at RSPB Dungeness in the background, but you can create these even if it's a 2 by 2 meter plot versus 5 hectares. As I said, you create it, you manage it in exactly the same way. You don't need to put over a big area. Or if you wanted to do half your lawn, that would be great. So how should you prepare it? So if you did want to resow the area, one way is you can just allow natural regeneration and reduce your mowing technique of that. So instead of mowing it frequently, you just mow it really twice a year. If you did want to resow the area, you must always sow wildflower seeds on bare ground. So you need to cut your grass as short as you can, remove all of those rake-ins and create bare ground by raking or by hoeing. You just want to have a very fine till on the soil surface. You broadcast the seeds over the top. Don't bury them, don't cover them with soil. They need to be on the top. Now, the best time for wildflower, really ideally, if you've got something like clay soil, is really mid-July to about the end of August, September. Don't go too much further than September because many of them need to have the few leaflets before the frost comes. If you are in a chalky area, you can sow now. So you would sow from March right the way through to around about the end of April, beginning of May. Don't leave it too late because you still want that soil to be moist for the seeds to be able to germinate. If you have an area that's really, really fertile, so it's a lot of grass density, what you can do is sow the yellow rattle. It's a semi-parasite. It parasitizes grass roots, reduces their density, opens up the sward and allows upper wildflowers in. Now that does have to be sown really in autumn, all the way up. You can sow it to December, but it needs frost to break the dormancy. But you can purchase plug plants of this online and you can pop them into your area as well. So once you've laid your seeds down, you want to lightly tread them in and then water them. So what you can do to extend the flowering season is cut half of that area. So if you have a 5 by 5 meter area, you could cut 2.5 of it, cut it very low, rake off all of those arisings, take them away, and then it encourages the flowers to grow again and you have a longer flowering season. Once it's finished flowering, you cut the whole thing back again, very short, rake it off, and then it will come through again the next year. If you do get a lot of weeds coming through, you may get some, if you're breaking the ground, you may get things like bristly ox tongue or thistles. Just control those, pull them out if you don't want them in your meadow. But it's basically just reducing that cutting regime. So what wildflower mixes to go for? Well, there's a variety out there. Just check when you are buying any wildflower mix that it is truly wildflowers, that they're not ones that are just going to last for a couple of years. They're not a cultivar of that. There's lots of seed manufacturers and lots of basically now online nurseries that you can check with. If it's a large area, you'd normally put 80% grasses with 20% wildflowers in. But if it's just in your garden and it's a relatively small area, or in your community patch, or in an allotment, you just probably can have pure wildflowers in there. So things that are ideal are things like the clovers, the bird's-foot trefoil. You'll get knapweeds in there. So all the things that are in this photo and more as well. So there's a variety that you can get them from. If anybody would like to ask me more about seed mixes or anything like that, please do at the end as well. Another nice thing you could do if you wanted to have a really good show that year, because a perennial, what I've just described, can take a bit of time to come through. So if you wanted a gorgeous show this year, what you can do now in our spring is, again, create bare ground. You broadcast the seeds over, but you use annual seeds. Now, annuals are hardy, they're tough. They're typically known as arable weeds, if you like. So when a soil is disturbed, they come up. So you've all seen the poppies that come up with the wheat fields as well. So things like poppies, corn marigolds, cornflowers, corn cockles, beautiful, beautiful flowers. You can create that bare ground now. Right to about, again, the beginning of May. Just make sure you want the soil still wet, but we don't want to get any more frost. So wait a little bit, I'd say, but not too long. Broadcast them in your surface, and then you will get them come up this year. So if you wanted them to come up again next year, you do have to cut them back and just lightly till your soil again, lightly scarify it. Because they're annuals, other wildflowers will move in and they will become outcompeted. So if you did want the same show again, you do have to disturb the soil each year. So what else are our gardens good for? Well, of course, they're fantastic for encouraging our bumblebees to nest as well. So our bumblebees will nest under paving stones, rockeries, sheds, but they will nest where something else has nested before. So typically a rodent or even a blue tit. The majority of our bumblebees cannot bring in their own nesting material. So they have to nest where something's been before, and provided that fur, the straw, the grass, the feathers, to keep the insulation. So what to do then if you do find a bumblebee nest in your garden? So at the moment, our queens are just coming out of hibernation and moving into number 2. They're going to be establishing their nests, collecting pollen, and building a little waxy cup of where they regurgitate all of their nectar. After 6 weeks, the first workers come through, and then they will have 3 worker brood cycles. And right at the end of the colony cycle is when the new queens and males are produced. So at this time, when the new queens and workers are produced, the old queen has died, her workers are dying, and the males will live for about 2 weeks. That new queen, if it's midsummer, will start another nest somewhere else. So she'll go straight to number 2, look for food, establish a new nest, and then have a second cycle. If it's one of our rarer species, at the end of their cycle, or if this is at the end of summer, those new generation of queens will go into hibernation, back to number 1, to then emerge again the next year. Now, by the time most people have seen a bumblebee nest, they've probably seen a lot of activity coming and going. And normally that will signify the peak of the bumblebee colony. And the peak is actually very near the end of the cycle. So as soon as you see lots of bumblebees, it probably only has a couple of weeks left to live. So we do say to people is please do leave them there. It's a great thing to have bumblebees in your garden, and they tend to not sting. It's very unlikely you would be. It would only be if you are perhaps disturbed that nest, or by accident, if a kid is running barefoot in the garden, they may accidentally step on one. But it's very, very rare that you would actually be stung by a bumble. So what can we put in our gardens for solitary bees? Well, these are ideal for our solitary bees. So you can buy them in any garden centre or supermarket. Ideally, they need to be about 15 centimetres long and have a variety of different size holes in them as well. So you can make them yourself out of old bits of timber, fence posts as well. And you can drill a variety of diameters from 2 right through to 10 millimetres. And this means you'll get a variety of different solitary bees then moving in. You need to position these about south-southeast facing. One of the good things for our bumblebees is actually a blue tit nesting box. Now, bumblebees will tend to nest south facing and blue tits will tend to nest north facing. So if you'd like a bumblebee in there, have it south facing and leave some nesting material in there. That can be grass cuttings. If you'd like a blue tit in there, clean out the nest box over winter and then they will move in thereafter. So who are you seeing out and about at the moment? Well, these are our big 7. So these are the most common bumblebees that you are going to see in your gardens. So all of them are emerging around about now. And you can see here, if I've just got one diagram of that bee, it means the queen's workers and males have the same colour. But sometimes our males will have extra little yellow beards at the front of their face, and they may have extra yellow banding as well. But these are the ones you'll see, and at the moment it is just the queens. In a few weeks, you'll start to see that first brood of workers who've replaced the queen and are going out and foraging. Now, the southeast of the UK is really one of the best areas for rare bumblebees, in particular the South Kent coast, the Essex coast and East Sussex coast. Because we have a very long coastline, there's a lot of chalk soil there, which is very good for floristic diversity. We have a mild climate and very close to continental Europe as well. So we get a lot of colonization. But what these species all have in common is that they are late emergers and they rely on open flower rich habitat. The one in the bottom middle there is the one that we are attempting to reintroduce. So there is 7, and the 7th rarest one is called the Great Yellow. Now this bumblebee, if we have a look at the map of the UK and Ireland there, you can see in the dark blue is the only areas now that this bee is actually found in. But over 100 years ago, it was actually found in the southeast. So over this last 100 years, it has become extinct in England, Wales, the lowlands of Scotland, and the vast majority of Ireland, the Republic and Northern. So it's had a massive range reduction. So that's why many of our bumblebees now have high conservation importance. So what are we doing at Bumblebee Conservation Trust to try and help our bumblebees? Well, the project that I work on is the Short-Haired Bumblebee project, and this is with RSPB and with Natural England. And this is the attempted reintroduction of one of our extinct species. So it was last recorded in Dungeness in 1988. Now, if we have a look at a map on the right there, we can see here that this was its population really prior to about the 1970s. So it reached as far as Humberside, but it was always more of a southern species. Now, really due to intensification, fragmentation, loss of habitat over this since really the 1940s, this species has rapidly declined and was last recorded in 1988. It's also declined across the whole of its European range, with only Sweden and Estonia still being countries that is found in good populations. So Dungeness and the rounding south coast of Kent going on down into East Sussex is a very good hotspot for rare bees. They are hanging on in these areas. So what we wanted to do is attempt to reintroduce this species as a flagship for basically bumblebee conservation, that some of our species have gone extinct, they are declining, we need to help them. So we want to attempt to introduce this species, but also to hopefully increase rare bumblebee populations in this area as well. So we work with a variety of farmers and landowners and give bespoke advice on how to manage and maintain flower-rich habitat. Of course, we monitor all bumblebee species as well. So where we've given habitat, we want to see how those species are doing over time. We also do lots of outreach, and we rely very heavily on volunteers to help us as well. So this is the area we work in. So we just go across as far as sort of going into the high weald. It gets a little bit too woody for the high weald for our bumblebees. There, they like the open areas, but we go as far around as Norvium, Battle, into those areas. So when we first started, we wanted a minimum of 100 hectares, and this was back in 2009, and within sort of by 2012, we wanted about 100 hectares that will provide continuation of forage for our bees, flower-rich diversity, so there's a choice for those bees, and just increase the flowering season for them. So if we think about it, 1 hectare is about the size of a football pitch. So these are some of the farmers here that we work with. So giving advice on flower-rich meadows and pollen nectar strips which surround arable fields. We also work with a variety of landowners, from smallholders to councils, improving the cuttings on bee roads, on seawalls as well. So during this last 12 years, we've actually worked with 50 farmers and 45 different landowners, and we've improved the cutting regime on 64 kilometres of bee roads. So in total, we've actually improved the habitat and given advice on over 2,400 hectares. So over a landscape scale, increasing connectivity. So if we've created all this habitat, we want to know, of course, that it's actually working and having an impact on our bees, and what sort of impact. So we do a variety of different methods to go out and record our bees, and we choose these on where we are doing habitat improvements, so we can see how the habitat changes over time with the wildflower surveys are increasing or helping our bumblebee species. And whenever we record a bumblebee, we also record what it's foraging on as well. So that gives us extra information of which species are using which flower. So these are the 5 rare species that we have in and around this area. Now the shrill carder is the UK's rarest bumblebee species. So this one unfortunately isn't doing very well, but these other 4 have done very well as a result of this work, and have all been re-recorded in areas not previously recorded in for between 5 to 25 years. And in the case of the top 2 and the large ruderal, or the large garden it's sometimes called, we've actually found these increasing in number. So they have responded very well to what we've been doing. So of course we've increased recording effort in this area, but we know we've also increased rare bumblebee populations. So we've done a lot of analysis on this, statistical analysis, and it has shown in the space of the project, 10 years, that these bumblebees are increasing. What we've actually seen is it tends to take 5 years to notice a response. So of course, when you're creating habitat, it needs to establish, it needs to grow, it needs to increase in its abundance. And it can take about 5 years for then that to have an impact on our bumblebees. So we must be patient with this, but it does work. So as I said, 3 of these rare species have increased due to this increase in habitat. And we believe that is the first project anywhere in Europe or in the Northern Hemisphere to actually show that increasing habitat really helps these species. And we now think the Rudolph Bumblebee, which is the one there, is actually the best place to find it. So of course, this habitat management is ideal for so many other species as well. So we're using bumblebees, pollinators, to restore an ecosystem that's largely been lost. Farmers like bees, they know how important they are for pollination. People like them, the public like them. So we can underpin lots of a habitat restoration with this species. So just quickly now, and finishing up, I'll just give you a bit of an update on where we are with the reintroduction side of it. So we've had lots of really positive success with our habitat creation, working with landowners, increasing rare bees. The reintroduction, unfortunately, hasn't been quite so successful. And I'll just give you a brief background to this. So we collected queens from Sweden, which is one of the only countries apart from Estonia where this species, the short-haired bumblebee, is increasing. So we asked Bjorn Cederberg, can we come over to Sweden? He's the Swedish bumblebee expert, and collect queens from the years of 2012 to 2016. So we had 2 transects in the west and in the south. And from these 2 transects, we collected queens for a period of 5 years. We then placed them in quarantine for 2 weeks, and we put them in quarantine so we could make sure that only healthy queens were then released. So if any bumblebee species that emerges, it's not just this species, 50% of them will actually have diseases. So we put them in quarantine so we could look after them for 2 weeks, and any that were diseased were not released. So we took a maximum of 100 per year, which was agreed with the Swedish authorities. So we were doing the reintroductions from 2012, 2016, and we did see evidence of some workers and evidence of perhaps colonies forming. But since we've actually stopped doing the reintroduction, we haven't had really any confirmed evidence for this species. It could be due to putting them in quarantine for those 2 weeks, meant that it delayed them from finding a nest. It could have weakened the queens, but we wanted to put them in quarantine because we know the movement of insects around the world can introduce new diseases. So that's something we obviously didn't want to do. It could have been that overall a small number of queens were released. But we will always continue to look for this species, and we'll continue to look this season and the following seasons as well. We do lots of outreach as well. So in normal years, we do school through to university, U3A groups. We run Bumblebee ID courses, lots of walks during the spring and summer months to get people catching and looking at bees. And we're often at county shows like South England and Kent County Show. So just to show the period between 10 years, we actually outreach to over 30,500 people. So around 3,000 people we do engage with each year about bumblebees, their conservation, habitat restoration. Volunteers are an amazing part of this project, and they are the backbone of achieving it. I'm the only person employed on the project, so there's a lot of work that goes into what we do, and it's thanks to our volunteers that do and help with so much of this work. So in conclusions, we know we've increased the recording for this species. We now have over 50 surveys established in this area. We know that rare bumblebees have increased for our habitat improvements, and this is something we're really excited about. And we've got very good data looking at what management techniques have the most impact, and we're currently preparing a scientific paper for that. We also have important information on what each bumblebee species uses, what it visitors. So we know over a landscape what flowers are needed to be able to attract rare bees, keep rare bees, and to attract the greatest number of bees. So we've worked very successfully with farmers and other landowners and worked on a landscape scale as well. So of course we'll be carrying on this year, and I've also got a trainee this year for 9.8 months, which is great, and her name's Claire Alley, and she started on Monday. So what about yourselves? If you'd like to, as a group, you can set up and go out and do your own bee walk survey. So these are walked once a month between March and October. And they can be any day of that week. It doesn't have to be the same day each month. It's totally at your convenience. So somewhere 1 to 2 kilometers long, somewhere where you enjoy walking, and you count the bumblebee species and you ID all of those as well. So it gives us great records on bees in your area. And this is UK wide. So it gives us some really good information about how bees are doing over time. So which bumblebees are doing well, which bumblebees are not doing well, what could possibly be the reasons for that. So if you'd like to find out anything more about that, do go on our website, and we've got our own Bee Walk website as well. And just to round up as well, if you are interested in learning anything more about our bumblebees, our first book, Bumblebees: An Introduction, it has a background about the ecology of our bees, more about their life cycle, how we can garden for them, and it has ID pages on every UK bumblebee species. It's just £10, and all those profits come back to Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and you can purchase that on our website. Also, we have membership there and other bits and pieces if you were interested. So thank you very much to everybody for listening to me. So that's my email address. You can also follow the project on Twitter and on Facebook. And thank you very much to our partners for supporting us for these 12 years. And thank you everybody for coming and listening to me tonight to talk. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikki. That was incredibly in depth. I think we'd all agree that that was really, really good. So thank you very much for that. And it's great to hear of the superb work that you're doing, especially with partners like the RSPB down at Dungeness. I know from personal experience that there's been mixed sort of successes down there, but the fact that there's still attempts and you're still trying is fantastic, and hopefully we will prevail. And of course, the more people that wild their gardens as well, the better, as we sort of got from that. So thank you very much for that. We'll move on to the questions now as well, if that's okay, Nikki.
Yeah.
We've had quite a few come in. I think as they've come in, you've sort of knocked probably quite a few of them and answered them yourself as we go along, which is really, really good. So the first one I've got is from Christine Brett. And that's how can the overwintering cells of sealed up eggs be protected from a little wasp, which destroyed mine the last time I provided a nesting area?
So are you talking about solitary bees there? I assume so. Solitary bees will go into basically the bamboo canes as well. So basically, it's a natural process, to be honest. So often what you'll see is when one of the females lays her egg, provides it with nectar and pollen, sometimes you'll see that female solitary bee go in, and immediately after you'll see a parasitic wasp follow in, and they will lay their egg in that same cell.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're sneaky, but that's life as well. But one thing you can do is to protect them over those winter months is you could actually bring in your solitary bee hotel and store it in your garage, and that will protect it from over winter from any of the frosts, etc. as well. But to be honest, what I'd say is change your bamboo every about 3 to 4 years, because eventually they will start to get quite old, they will get quite musty, and you'll start to see less and less solitary bees moving in. So the peak is normally about year 2, year 3, and then you'll start to see a decline after that. But what I would do is change them after that quite frequently. And you know, the more you put up, the more, you know, solitary bees could hopefully get through. But have the length of about 15 centimeters, because they first lay male eggs. They first lay female eggs, and then right at the end they lay the male eggs, and the males come out first and then the females come out later. So they need those quite depth sizes to be able to lay the females and then the males. So around about 15 centimeters or so is ideal, and southeast facing.
Yeah, thank you. It was just so disheartening to see that, because the first year we had all these lovely bees hatch out and go into the pollinate our apple tree. And then next year we saw these nasty little wasps go in and do nasty things and eat the ends out. Horrible.
Yeah, it's
I know that's nature, but that wasn't my intention.
I know what you mean. It's disappointing. You know, the more you could put up, the more it would help. So you could always pop more up, but unfortunately there's not really that much we can do about it. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's nice to see them, but you could always create a little bit, if you do have a little bit of bare ground as well. If you keep that bare, you'll get some of other solitary bee species like tawny mining bees, the little red ones, beautiful species. They use mud, they won't use the bamboo, and they absolutely love soft fruits and the fruit crops. So they're an ideal one for your apples to go to.
And then tree bees, you haven't mentioned tree bees. Had those as well in a bird box.
Yeah, tree bees,
they're amazing.
Yeah, so one of the key things about blue tip nest boxes is that quite a few bumblebees will use them. One of the favorites is the tree bumblebee. And that's because the tree bumblebee, so called because it normally nests in old woodpecker holes or any holes in dead wood. So of course a blue tip nest box is the perfect replication for that. So they will often nest in them, but other of our more common bees will as well. But yeah, you'll notice a slight buzz coming out of them instead of any cheeping, and you'll know it's the
it was crazy, really mad. They did it after the blue tips had left.
Yeah, they were often moving
on the hole up with mud. It was amazing.
It's really good, and you've got little guard workers.
Yeah, that's right, around it. Yeah,
just making sure that only the members of their colony come in.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much for your help.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Nikki, as well, for answering that. I've got a question that's come in on the Facebook Live, which I'll quickly address before it escapes my mind. And it's, does it matter what type of wood you drill holes in for a bee hotel type thing?
No, any wood. Bamboo tends to be the most easiest and the most flexible. I've just literally brought in some bumblebee solitary bee ones that we're going to be putting up. You can buy these anywhere, but these are the sort of tubes you can use, and these ones are self-drilled. But if you have any old logs, timber, your fence posts, doesn't matter. It's absolutely fine. For the solitary bee hotels, that if you want to make one, these are actually sort of more like a cardboard. So these ones here are just cardboard, if you like. But yeah, anything like bamboo, any sort of any wood is absolutely fine. They're not fussy. You can also use cob bricks as well, and you can make holes in cob bricks. So they're absolutely fine as well. There's quite a few information if you Google it on making cob bricks for solitary bees, and also a variety of wood, but any wood, that's fine, as long as it's ideally as long as it's not been varnished. Yeah, that'd be great.
Brilliant. That's really good, really interesting. I have a question here from Jasper. Whenever we see a bee fall in the pool, we are so quick to save it. Great to hear. Is it true that we're losing our bees? And if so, how does that hurt us humans? Thank you for this amazing information.
Yeah, so how to impact us? It's mainly through pollination, really, and of course it's pollination of our valuable food crops. So as I said earlier, 84% of our highest value crops are pollinated by bees. So of course things like oilseed rape, our beans, you know, all the food you grow in your allotment, the courgettes, you know, our raspberries, our strawberries, our tomatoes are all pollinated. And particularly for farmers, they are worth more money to have it insect pollinated. So if we think about raspberries, the little bumps on them are called drupes. And if it is self-fertilized, you have less drupes on them. So you have to sell those for jam because they're actually worth less money. Whereas if you get pollination, you have more of these, it's more visually attractive to us, and they can be sold at a higher price. So there's financial incentives of having insect pollination versus self-pollination. And of course, it's a free service that the bees are providing. So if we do ever get to a situation that the bees are so low and we have to start trying to pollinate ourselves, what do? Do you build little robots that can be drones and fly from flower to flower, or do you have to start hand pollinating? So of course they maintain, of course, our wildflowers as well, and that rich diversity of wildflowers that we have. So not only are they important for us as in food crops, but maintaining the ecosystem that's around us as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nikki. And I think this might have been one of the ones that were addressed, but I'll ask anyway, and you feel free to hop in, Nat, and clarify if you fancy or wish to elaborate. Nat has asked, what can we do to help our bees in our backyard? Is there anything? I think you might have addressed that.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much you can do. It doesn't matter what size area you have, what aspect it is, what type of soil you have. There is always something you can plant in that area. So be kind. Our website on Bumble Bee Conservation Trust does give you a tool where you can click all the flowers you have, whether this is your garden or allotment, community space, and it then gives you some ideas about what else to plant as well. So if you prefer pots, or if you want to increase your borders, if you have a wet shady area, what you can plant in there as well. But there's a huge variety, of course, of flowers that we can plant in these situations. And of course we've got the flowers we can use at garden centres, but now so many online nurseries are selling wildflowers as well, and many of these wildflowers are more adapted to the different soil types, the different aspects as well. So it's always worth shopping around if you like, and seeing what's out there.
Brilliant. And I, from experience, slightly biased, Paradise Park at the moment, for example, in New Haven, are doing I think it's £8 for £8 at the moment on plug plants, and they do all sorts that are bee friendly, certified, and things like that. So they're definitely worth a visit. Not sponsored, not paid, sadly. Is an old tree stump okay to drill holes in for solitary bees? That's from Janine.
Is it okay to what? Sorry.
Is an old tree stump okay to drill holes in for solitary bees?
Yeah, you can do. Alternatively, you could just let it rot down over time. Old tree stumps or creating log piles. So if you were ever cutting back or a larger shrub, you can create your own log pile. Tree stumps are also perfect as well. As they start to degrade, you'll get a lot of insects moving in. You'll get solitary bees going there. You may get the bumblebees going in, nesting under them. For old tree stumps as well, things like stag beetles rely very, very heavily on those. So you can get a wide variety of different species coming in. I'd let it naturally just degrade over time, and the solitary bees will be able to get in there, and you'll get a variety of other things as well. But creating a little space of log pile or even leaf litter as well. That's another one where a lot of bumblebees will hibernate. Of course, you might get hedgehogs using them as well. So actually not being too tidy is one of the best things that you can be in your garden as well.
Okay, thanks. They've been cut down for over 3 years and they don't seem to be like degrading at all. How long does it take them to start?
What species is it?
Not a clue. It was just a huge, massive, like bush type tree. It looked a bit weedy. It didn't look like, it wasn't like an elm or anything like a nice tree. I think it was a self-seeded thing that had just grown
And just sort of
for
taken
years.
over.
Yeah, but it was
I mean,
massive.
is it a south-facing sort of area? Do they get the sun, the tree stumps?
Yeah, they're about 5 foot high because we just like lopped off.
Oh, okay.
It was overgrowing like 3 or 4 different gardens. It was massive.
Yeah, we'll give it a go. I mean, if it's 5 foot high, yeah, go for it. And yeah, if you drill a variety of holes 2 to 10 millimeters, yeah, it'll help it go along. But yeah, just do it all the way around. Yeah, see what happens. Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, it seems like there's a trend of keeping your gardens wild and messy and not too pristine is definitely good for nature. That's certainly what seems to be becoming a trend now, which is good. Sam has asked on Facebook Live, do solitary bees nest in old plant stems?
Yes, they do. Good question. So they will go in things like bramble, so old bramble stems. And they also go in plants as well, like teasel. So basically ones that are hollow stemmed. So they don't have to do too much work. They can just go in and use them. So if you do have things like teasels in your garden, do let them stand over those winter months, because of course the seeds are ideal for many finches as well. And also, yeah, lots of solitary bees will go down and use them as well. So hollow stems, really good, really perfect. And there is a few ant species that actually specialize in nesting as well in bramble holes. So it's amazing what nature will use and recycle and upcycle to find a nesting. Yeah, so that's another great one to use as well.
Absolutely fascinating. Another one that's just come in. I need to stop saying another one. We know there's another one. We've heard that bumblebees are attracted to the color blue. Is this true?
Yeah, because people say blues and purples are their favorite. Obviously, bumblebees, all bees, look see in the UV range. So what we see as blue is not what they see. So blues, purples do tend to be quite a strong attraction, but there is one species, the red-tailed Bumby, which seems to have quite a close relationship with yellow flowers as well. So I would go for a variety of different colours. To be honest, if they're hungry and they want food, they're not going to be that fussy. They will go for whatever is available within that area. But certainly I have heard that before, but they will appear to use all of the colour ranges. And the only one we've really noticed that has a slight preference is the red tail for yellow flowers. But what's really interesting is if you look under UV light, and I'm sure there's some videos on YouTube of this, if you put a UV light over a flower, what we think is a uniform pattern, often they will have little guiding strips to the bees. So it will be like a little runway, if you like, where the bee lands on and it's guided into the flower where the nectar and pollen is. So it's like little lighting landing strips for them to use, which is really cool to do. Poppies are one of the ones that's it's actually really fascinating to see, because they just look red to us. But yeah, flowers have adapted and evolved over time to offer little landing strips to the bees as well, which is really amazing.
It's truly fascinating. Martin's asked, I like the idea of making a garden for bumblebees, but own a few dogs. Will this work?
I don't see why not. Obviously, they ruin your lawn a wee bit with wee and stuff, but yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, sometimes perhaps your dog might try and have a swipe at a bumblebee, but it'll realise pretty quickly that it's probably not fair game to go for one. But yeah, if you've got borders, pots, yeah, no problem whatsoever. I've always had dogs growing up and a variety of different animals. So yeah, I don't see any problem with young kids or with animals. It's just sort of learning to watch them from a little way back, just a tiny way back. And dogs don't seem to be that fussed, to be honest, by bumblebees or other bee species. But as well with kids, it's great to introduce them to wildlife from that young age and just watch them and observe them. And the solitary bee hotels are a perfect one for that as well, because they can see the bees coming and going and seeing what they're doing and just watching the bees moving from flower to flower. They're not interested in what we're doing. So it's nice to sort of have that. But yeah, I don't think having animals, pets, I have bunny rabbits that are out in the garden and they do fine with the bees.
Thanks, Nikki. Karen has said, we would like to record a baseline in our gardens as part of our Wilder Garden project. Then when our community enhances their gardens, they can have some tangible record of their success on attracting bees. Any advice on how folks could do this? I assume that you would probably point to the previously mentioned bee walk.
Yeah, bee walk, definitely. For gardens, it might be a wee bit small, because we normally say 1 kilometre to 2 kilometres. You could either do a group of gardens together, and you could set up as a group and sort of permission to walk through people's gardens and go through them. Alternatively, you can obviously get people recording in their back gardens. So if you give people an ID sheet, I'd go for just really the big 7, the most common species that you can get, and people can just sort of mark down which bees that they see. But it's great to have a baseline study, so you can see what bees are present there before your change, and then as change happens, you can see which perhaps new species you're introducing in, and then see how the numbers are increasing over time. But have a look on Bee Walk. Just see, you could get a group together, have some ID training, and then go out and those are walks once a month, or you can do ad hoc recording as well. So that is just individually in your garden, looking at the species as well. But yeah, I'm happy to give more advice on that. If anybody wants to email me, I'd be happy to sort of push you in the right direction about how to do that and stuff. So yeah, I think that's really exciting.
Thanks. We're hoping that by the end of this we'll eventually have like neighborhood champions.
Wicked, yeah.
So if they can be trained up to support with the ID and everything, then that gives us a baseline this year. Because we want people to keep going and be excited. So
definitely, it is. Not only is it great to see what's happening in your garden, it's so nice to get outside and record, and there's so many positives as well. Obviously, we've all been locked inside, but to enjoy your garden now as well and see the life that you're creating in it as well is really nice to have, and it's so good for mental health, mental well-being. And if you can do that as a community, make new friends and stuff, I think it sounds great. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll have you back for ID, Nikki.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Cheers, Karen. And Sandra's asked, I assume Sandra's alluding to the Bumblebees, an introduction book that you mentioned earlier. Does that book have more info on gardens for bees?
Yes, it does. I'm going to be totally biased because I was the lead author on it and say it's a great book and well worth getting. But yeah, it does. It covers everything you need to sort of know. It's from a beginner's, so we haven't used technical terms or anything like that. And it does cover all about gardens, about seasons, about different, if you've got balconies, if you wanted to do a pond, every sort of element, what could be put in there and what could be created. So the most important thing with bumblebees is, and with our bees, is that everybody can do something to help. And that's what such a nice thing is. If you just spend £10 on flowers, you will make a difference. You will attract bees into your garden. So it's something we can all take part in, and like we can do that with our neighbours, bounce ideas off of them. And if you didn't perhaps like a certain flower but your neighbour did, you could have a combination on the street. It would be fantastic. But great book,
Brilliant. I might have to pick myself one of those up as well, or click the button to get one. We've got a lot of love coming in, Nikki, saying it was wonderful, you were awesome, fascinating, thank you. That was at 8:01, so we're getting there on the questions now. I have to echo those myself. Bridget has said, we've had a couple of bumblebees in trouble in our garden over the year. They don't seem to be able to fly. Is there anything we can do for these bees, or are they at the end of their life?
It really depends on the time of year that you're finding them. Certainly at the end of the colony cycles, and this is most notable sort of in around about August and September, is that the workers are dying off. That is a natural part of the process of the colony cycle. So you will see them being very lethargic, and that is a natural process. What you can do to help those bees is just pop them onto the nearest flower, just in case maybe they haven't had enough forage over the last, half an hour or something. You can pop them on. This time of year, as queens are emerging, they've used a lot of their fat resources while they've been overwintering. So as they climb out of their hibernation area, they may be quite lethargic then as well, and they may be quite exhausted. You often see them sitting still. They may be basking in the sun, because of course they need that external sun resource to warm them up, warm their muscles up so they're able to fly. And again, if you see that, the best thing to do is pop them onto your nearest flower that they can feed and forage on. And that will certainly help them out, because obviously otherwise they've got to warm up and they've then got to find forage. So popping them onto the nearest flower is the best thing to do. It used to be suggested that you could use sugary water to try and revive them. What we tend to say is use that as the very, very last option. So if it's out, you see them, pop them on the nearest flower. But obviously sometimes you do get bees coming into a house or into a greenhouse conservatory, and they keep banging their heads against the glass. That's because they orientate towards the sun. So they're just trying to get out and fly towards the sun. They don't obviously understand the concept of glass. So that can make them exhausted quite quickly. Maybe in that situation, again, pop them out on a flower, but you could always do 50% sugar, 50% water, offer it in a teaspoon, and you'll see the bee's tongue come out, and he or she will start to drink that up. But what I tend to say is always just pop them on the nearest flower. You may see bees with mites at this time of year on them. Now that is not the varroa mite that affects honeybees. This is mites that bumblebees carry in over winter with them. Once they get to there and found their nest, these mites jump off and they eat the detritus within the nest. So they act as cleaners within the nest. So mites on bumblebees actually tend to be positive, because they're actually helping for cleaners in the nest. So that's something totally different from varroa mite, which destroys honeybees. So varroa mite cannot affect bumblebees, and it can't affect solitary bees. It can only affect honeybees because they have to overwinter within the brood cells. Whereas mites on bumblebees are a good thing, because they will clean the colony and they will keep it healthy.
That was really interesting. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Really good. Thank you. Loads more thanks coming in. And Leslie has said it's good to hear that some of the work we've already done on Riverside Park is helping. So that's fantastic. That one we've already answered. Thank you, Nikki, for the talk. I have a very small patio area, but love bees. Can you suggest one thing I could do to help them?
So on a patio, I put in pots. I'm quite a pot fan, to be honest. I put a lot of herbs in mine. So these tend to, as well, when we have droughts, you don't have to water them as much. They don't need as much. But certainly things like sage, rosemary, mint, thyme, the lavenders, ideal for pots. But other things as well, like salvias. Obviously, you can put bulbs in them as well. So I have a lot of mine. I put bulbs in, so crocuses, snowdrops. They come through first, and then I'll have the salvias and the mints come through later as well. So on a patio, if that's fantastic. You can always put your own display out. You could put sort of the big sort of bordery ones that you could fill with soil as well. But definitely things. You could even sow it with wildflower seeds as well. So some of my volunteers, they've got sort of the nice border tubs, and they've just sprinkled cornfield annuals on them, and that comes up beautifully as well. So you can have a wide variety of things just in pots as well. There's so many flowers that will do well in a pot. So wildflower annual seeds, definitely some bulbs. and yes, herbs, and then lots of things like salvias will do very well in pots as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll try it.
Yeah, great stuff. I'm going to try and speed through now because time's getting on a little bit. So Paula has asked, how far will bees travel between habitats to look for food?
Good question. Yeah, it all depends. So solitary bees tend to be quite localized. It's very hard, to be honest, to really try and properly monitor them. They will tend to nest very close to where they're foraging. So many of them might only go up to 500 meters, but if they don't have to go that far, they're not going to. Bumblebees will go up to a mile. But again, if they don't have to go that far, they're not going to. So that's why it's good to have that continuation of forage in that area, so they don't have to then travel further to find it. Honeybees will go much further to find a food resource. Because they have such a large colony size, they need to recruit to a very good large source. So they will go to, say, an all-seed rape field, and they will actively recruit there. So they can go between 5, sometimes even up to 8 miles. So those tend to be the longest flyers. Because they have a much larger colony size, they need a much greater food resource as well. So they tend to be the longest flyers. Bumblebees, yeah, around about a mile, but that will vary species to species as well. But it's actually pretty hard to try and monitor how far they will go, but around about a mile.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I'll just quickly, someone's just asked where they can get hold of the book. I put the wrong link in. There's the correct link.
Yeah, if you go onto our website as well. Oh, perfect. Yeah, you've popped that on. Yeah, it's all there, and yeah, it's only a tenner. So yeah, it's a good book to have a look at.
Spot on. Thank you. Is it true that towards the end of the bee season, when bees are slowing down, that they can still sting?
So only females sting. It is not the males that sting. So a sting is evolved from what's called an ovipositor, and an ovipositor is used to lay eggs. So this actually evolved. Our bees and our wasps are evolved from, sorry, our bees and our ants are evolved from a wasp species. So wasps are basically parasitic and they hunt prey. So those females want to inject their eggs into that prey species, whether it's a caterpillar or a spider. So a sting evolved from the ovipositor, so they can sting it, paralyze the prey, and then inject their eggs into them. So bees evolved from wasps and became veggies and got all the food they need from flowers, but they retain the sting purely as a defensive mechanism. So it is only females because of the sting, and ants can sting you as well, but became ground dwellers, and they forage at that different part of the ecosystem. So we do have wasps to thank for the diversity of bees and ants that we have now on our planet, but only females sting, males can't sting.
I have to say one thing. Thanks, Nikki. Big time. I don't think I've ever spent an evening with my mind being blown quite so much, to be perfectly honest. So I've got one in from Claire here. I had a really interesting bee that seemed to be very territorial. A round wall germinator and round wall germander and rosemary in my garden. It seems to have been really bullying behaviour and bashes other bees out of the way of its flowers. Why does it do this, and what type of bee is it likely to be? I have Cardia bees and tree bees in my garden too. So
yeah. So what you have is a wall Cardia bee male. So these are very territorial, and they are a bit of a bully boy, because what they would do is they would patrol their patch, and they particularly love things like lamb's ear. That is one of their favourites, but they will go for variety as well. And that male will not tolerate any other insect or anything else being near his flowers where he can attract his females in. So he will basically bully and push away everything else. So whether it's a bumblebee, whether it's a wasp, even sometimes they can sort of fly around in your face and go, you know, this is my patch. So it's, yeah, they are a bit the old bully boys, but they are a really fascinating species. So they are the wool Cardia bees. And they're so cool because the female will actually card, you know, with the lambs here, they have furry leaves. They take the hairs off the leaves and they use that to card in between their cells. So hence why they're called the wool carders. And the males, yeah, just a bit territorial. It's really, that one is the most noticeable of the males being territorial. We don't tend to see that in many of the other solitary bee species, but the wool carder he's very territorial. But if you Google wool carder bee, there is information on the net about that, particularly from Bee Wars, the Bee Wasp and Ant Recording Society. But they are fascinating little characters.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. I'm just going to carry on saying how much my mind's being blown. Nancy has asked, I'm setting up a honeybee hive. What do you suggest I place it with the entry facing north? How do you suggest I place it with the entry facing north? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know as much about honeybees as well. What I suggest you do, a few of my volunteers are honeybee keepers, but if you're getting a hive and placing it out, definitely sign up and join your local honeybee keepers society. So wherever you are, they have lots. Like in Kent we have about 20 or so, and in East Sussex it'll be the same. So I think when you're setting up and putting it in the right place, contact them, because they know far better than me, to be honest, about honeybees and their position. I know a bit about their ecology and stuff, but I'm afraid tending them, etc. Get involved, if you haven't already, with your local beekeepers authority, because there'll be a wealth of knowledge there, which is great.
Brilliant. That's really useful. I've just put a really dirty link in. Let's put a cleaner one in. That's to Brighton and Lewis beekeepers.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
So hopefully that'll help with that one.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've also lost track of where I was. I'm getting tired. Lots of love coming in, to be honest, for the talk, and I can't agree more with that. It's been, I think, incredibly inspiring for a lot of people here, and certainly for myself. We've got Felicia's, who said, I feel inspired to be able to identify different bees. Might join the conservation group. Have to go now. So I'm tempted myself to join up now, to be honest. Interesting talk. Didn't know there were so many species.
Yep.
And I think we might be there on the questions front. We are indeed. Thank you so much, Nikki.
Oh, thanks ever so much, everyone.
Everything. It's been really brilliant. Thank you. Big time.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for coming along and sharing your evening with us.
Not at all. Thanks for your time. Karen, did you want to come in and say anything about the Wilder Gardens project before we head off for the night?
Yeah, Nikki, awesome. Always awesome. Will continue to be awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Part of the Wild Gardens, and Nikki's set out quite a lot of it tonight. Obviously, we've already had a talk on hedgehogs. We've had a talk on from Bug Life. Next week we have bats and what we can do in our gardens and homes to help the bats. And Amanda, who runs the bat hospital and has been doing it for an enormous amount of years, promises to bring some of her bats along. So that'll be a little bit different for us. And then the week after we have Lewis Swift supporters. So again, how we can adapt our homes and the difference we can make. And that's kind of the whole thing that all our speakers are touching upon, and what our project is all about. It's about us making a difference in our home, in a tiny space, whether it's a pot or whether we're rewilding our garden or verge or front drive. We're just trying to make a little bit of difference. And I think Nikki put it really well today, and this is how this project's evolved for us. It's the connectivity in our area. So we're sandwiched in by the South Downs. We're very urbanised. We actually don't have that many verges that we can do that much with because of the utilities in there, when there is a verge anyway, and people aren't parking on them. So gardens for us is absolutely essential to get that connectivity for the bees to be able to travel, eat, and so on. So yeah, hedgehogs to be able to move, because we haven't got very many hedgehogs and so forth. So join the Facebook group, because that's where we all chat about it. There's over 1,000 members on there. They're always sharing information. There's lots of ecologists, there's lots of community groups that you can join and do bigger stuff. And hopefully you'll all join up to see the bats next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I've just put the link for anyone interested, both in the Facebook Live and the Zoom chat, to the event for next week. I think it's going to be brilliant. And I think Emma's on a note to sort of round up on. Well done to your area too, locally, for being such a big push on rewilding, inspirational. And I think that's, I'm not going to get back on my soapbox like I did last week, but I think that's one thing with these that's much to Leslie's disapproval. That's one thing that that has been brilliant, is the sort of inspiration and the passion that's being shown throughout these talks. So thanks everyone for coming along. Leslie, did you want to say anything before we go?
No, I was just going to say thank you to Nikki, and thank you to Karen, and thank you to you, George, for more or less chairing the evening. Makes a nice change for a chair not to have to chair.
It's all good.
Yeah, so just encouraging everyone really to get out in the gardens. Even I've been out planting in my pots over the last few days. So if I can do it, anyone can.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks. I think we'll wrap it up now, George. Thank you.
Yep,
Lovely
absolutely.
to see everybody, and hopefully we'll see you for next week's talk as well.
Cheers, everyone. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Nikki.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.